No.
You can't afford to buy a house, we'll waive the down payment.
No.
You can't afford to buy a house, we won't make you pay any payment on principal for the first 3 years. In fact, if you can't even afford an interest-only payment with no credit and no down payment, we'll give you a subsidized interest rate. Guess what we discovered?
Didn't work.
You can't afford to buy a house, you can't afford to buy a house. Because what happened, and this is anybody who had thought about real life as opposed to academic theory would have understood this. Because buying a house involves what happens when the roof leaks, what happens when the electricity goes bad, what happens when the plumbing needs fixed, what happens when the appliance goes bad. And all of a sudden it turned out, oh, you mean there's more to owning a house than a government subsidized payment of less than real value?
Yeah.
Now, if you do that to one family, it's a personal tragedy and they go bankrupt. When you do it to 1 million families, it's a national crisis.
Yep.
And yet, have you heard any national political figure say, we have a cultural problem with a financial consequence? No. In fact, I would argue that Chris Dodd and Barney Frank don't have a clue. They created the mess with the best of intentions, and they believe in the mess, and they're now trying to prop it up by making it a bigger mess. And this is a core decision. And let me tell you what it comes down to. I describe it as a 5P policy, and I think it's very important to understand because it will help you understand a number of places where we have huge, huge challenges with the current team in Washington. The first thing you have to understand is, what are your principles? What's the basic, what are the things by which you know, for example, for a very long time I've had a principle that if you want to cook an egg, you put it on the stove. And that may seem obvious. But you know, if you're a tenured faculty at Harvard, it's a theoretical proposition which has got to be considered in a way that might have a number of other options. Like maybe you want a hard egg, right? You said you want a hard-boiled egg. You don't have to. You could also make it hard by putting it in the freezer. And if you freeze it long enough, it'll be hard. It'll meet the technical objective requirement, right? So the principles you have are really important. From your principles, you should derive policies. The policies then need to have a process of implementation. And you have to find people who understand the principles and policy in order to do the implementing. And then if you do it right, you ought to maintain popular support because you're actually getting the job done. This is what Reagan did. Reagan said he had 3 great principles. Lower taxes and regulation to restart the American economy by encouraging entrepreneurs and job creators. Rebuild faith in American and the American civic culture so we would be proud to be American. Defeat the Soviet Empire. Now, you know, it was a short list, but it was a relatively important list. Our economy boomed for a quarter century. Most of us became proud to be American again, and the Soviet Empire disappeared. You would normally think of that as a reasonably consequential presidency. But Reagan had, over a very long period of time, starting as an undergraduate at Eureka College, where he was an economics major, before the age of Keynes. Reagan was old enough, he actually studied general economics back when it involved 2 + 2 = 4. As opposed to the Keynesian model, which is 2 + 2 when added to the national debt can be done in such a way that it equals 73 in a manner that you have to understand, which is why you have the current mess we're in. This president, by the way, will more than double the national debt. That is, take all the national debt built up over the first 220 years of the country. He will double it in 8 years if he's reelected. That's how big. So clearly he thinks 2 + 2 = infinity. Now, in that setting, let's take this idea of principles and policy for a second. If your basic principles are European socialism, so you believe in high taxes, you believe in big government, you believe that people who serve in government are noble and people who serve in business are basically bad, you believe that everybody who is successful ought to be punished for being successful by taking away their money, you believe in attacking every industry that's around, you have an attitude that the people who really matter are trial lawyers, union leaders, regulators, and bureaucrats.
You got Obama.
That set of principles means you probably kill jobs. And you kill a lot of jobs because you don't even know that you're killing them. So they're in the middle of you know, let's take, Joe Gaylord put it to me a little while ago, I think it's a great line. He said, the stimulus package, historically, that never has so much money been spent to kill so many jobs. I mean, remember, they promised us if we would pass a $787 billion government stimulus package with no elected official having read it. Which is why my book, To Save America's subtitle is Stopping Obama's Secular Socialist Machine, because if you can get $787 billion out of Congress with no one having read it, that's a machine. That's not representative self-government. And what was the promise? If they would pass it immediately, unemployment would never go above 8%.
Yeah, right.
Remember?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have the videotape. We can direct you to it on YouTube. Fact is, the stimulus was exactly wrong because it stimulated bureaucrats and it stimulated politicians. And when you stimulate bureaucrats and politicians, you terrify business people. So every small business in the country said, let me get this straight, we're going to have a bigger environmental protection agency with more power. We're going to have a bigger Food and Drug Administration with more power. We're going to have more trial lawyers filing more lawsuits. Taxes are going to go up next year by the largest amount in American history. They're trying, even now in the middle of this total economic disaster, what is Harry Reid trying to do? He's trying to pass an energy bill to increase the cost of energy. And now you live in the second highest electricity price in the country. Think about this. Your electricity price is the only place that's higher is Hawaii, and they have to ship all of the energy to Hawaii. I mean, they at least have an excuse. Now, in the middle of paying the highest electricity rate in the country, and in the continental United States, you have the highest electricity rate. So you have to ask yourself, why would your senators want to pass a bill to raise the cost of electricity?
They're idiots.
No, I don't think they're idiots. I think that they, in fact, believe in a socialist utopia in which if only all of you could work in the government, and the government paid up, you know, presently somebody will suggest what we need is an electricity subsidy transfer program so that poor people who can't afford electricity will be able to afford electricity because we'll raise taxes on other people to give them the money to buy the electricity, which will be too expensive because we raised the price of electricity. But after all, we can afford to raise the price of electricity because we're going to give them a subsidy so they can afford to pay for the electricity. Now, we don't have the money to subsidize them, but that's what we're going to do. That strategy. This is the Chinese Full Employment Act. It's going to drive manufacturing. You lost 20,000 manufacturing jobs in Connecticut in the last 2 years. You raise the price of electricity, you raise the price of diesel fuel, you raise the price of gasoline, you raise the price of heating oil. Guess what happens? You're going to lose more jobs. Now, why is the president committed to Chinese full employment? I mean, why doesn't he slow down? I know he thinks of himself as a citizen of the world, but why doesn't he start at home? You know, create jobs in America for a while.